Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're breaking down a deeply unsettling criminology file, the 1938 Tsuyama Massacre. We're going to forensically examine what is literally one of the most statistically devastating mass shootings in modern global history. To really understand the mechanics of an event like this, we've got to look way past the tragedy itself and unpack the exact data, the psychological profile, and the specific timeline that allowed it all to happen.
To truly grasp the reality of this case, we need to anchor ourselves in the historical setting. The year is 1938. We are in pre-war Japan. We're talking about an era long before rapid communications, modern tactical police responses, or even advanced mental health interventions were a thing. It was a time when highly isolated rural communities relied entirely on their own tight-knit social structures just to survive, pretty much completely cut off from state-level policing or psychological infrastructure.
30. That is the incredibly grim victim count of this single incident. It's a staggering figure that immediately grabs your attention from a purely analytical perspective, especially when you consider the historical era and the really rudimentary nature of the weapons they had available back then.
But you know what the truly terrifying aspect of this criminology file is? The speed. Under 90 minutes. 30 victims in less than an hour and a half. It completely forces us to ask, how on earth could such a highly lethal, impossibly rapid event occur in an isolated area without any immediate intervention?
So picture this. You have a rural village that entirely lacks modern security infrastructure. In this era, these agricultural communities were incredibly tightly packed, with traditional wooden, paper-walled homes built right next to one another. There were absolutely no telephones to call for external help and no local police force actively on patrol. Because it was such an isolated, highly trusting community, they were entirely unprepared for the sheer scale of the violence that was about to show up at their doorstep. It stands out as this devastating global anomaly in history precisely because of that absolute vulnerability.
Mutsuo Toi was just 21 years old when this whole event took place. We were analyzing a mind that was still actively developing, yet simultaneously experiencing a rapid, absolutely catastrophic collapse.
Let's map out how this escalated. Just a few months prior, Toi received a devastating medical update, a tuberculosis diagnosis. Now, in 1930s rural Japan, tuberculosis wasn't just a physical medical issue. People viewed it as a highly infectious death sentence. And because of that fear, this diagnosis triggered a severe cultural practice known as murahachibu, basically total village ostracization. Weeks prior to the attack, that massive stigma resulted in severe social rejection by his neighbors and his peers. By 1938, that exact sequence triggered an extreme, total psychological breakdown.
So the absolute core trigger here, extreme social isolation. It was this sudden, complete exclusion from his community due to his illness that ultimately catalyzed his total psychological collapse. It's basically a textbook, yet undeniably tragic, cascade of unchecked mental deterioration entirely driven by societal fear.
Toi actually engineered a scenario to render the village completely defenseless. Step 1, he deliberately severed the local power lines, plunging the entire isolated community into pitch darkness. Step 2, to navigate that darkness and move fluidly from house to house, he equipped himself with head-mounted flashlights, securing absolute visual superiority over the sleeping residents. Step 3, he armed himself with a highly lethal, customized loadout. We're talking a modified Browning shotgun paired with traditional bladed weapons, including swords and axes. He essentially combined modern and historical weaponry, engineered specifically for maximum lethality in close-quarters environments.
Which brings us right back to this grim number. 30. Knowing his meticulous tactical planning, the severed power lines, the headlamps, the specialized close-quarters weapons, we can now cleanly trace the lethal efficiency behind that victim count. Executed in under 90 minutes. When you combine a total psychological collapse with intense, calculated tactical advantages over an entirely unprepared population, you create a terrifyingly rapid, high-stakes event. It was executed with a speed that left absolutely zero time for an external response or any kind of community defense.
Believe it or not, this event directly contributed to how we classify extreme violence today. Have you ever heard the term spree killing? It's a foundational criminological classification involving murders occurring in rapid succession across multiple locations. Unlike a serial killer, who has distinct cooling-off periods between events, or a mass murderer, who typically strikes in a single confined location, a spree killer moves fluidly and rapidly from one location to the next without a break.
The 1938 Tsuyama Massacre serves as a definitive, anchoring case study for this exact psychological profile.
So, to summarize the core psychological autopsies from this criminology file, we have three major takeaways. First, this remains an absolute cornerstone case study in forensic psychology and behavioral analysis. Second, it profoundly highlights the deadly, unpredictable impact of extreme social isolation on a developing mind. And finally, it starkly demonstrates the severe, tangible consequences of lacking accessible mental health interventions. This century-old tragedy isn't just some historical footnote. It is structurally relevant to modern behavioral science.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty heavy question to chew on. How does extreme social isolation still trigger mass violence today? The weapons and the eras might change, but the unbroken chain between unchecked social stigma, a total lack of psychological support, and devastating violence remains a super urgent issue we are still trying to solve globally. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I will leave you to reflect on that critical question.